Hi, I'm Holly, Program Manager at Edison Ford Winter Estates, and you're here for our discussion about Edsel Ford and his life and legacy. I do have to confess that I am an admirer of Edsel Ford, and I could easily do several more parts on this. This is a very condensed version of his life and legacy. And where I am is at their home, and well, not really there, but the picture behind me is a statue of Edsel and Eleanor, and we're on their property. They're at Gawker Point in Grosse Pointe Shores in Michigan. And I did get to visit there once, but I'd love to go back because they've done even more since then. The life and legacy of Edsel Ford. Edsel Ford was born on November 6, 1893 in Detroit, Michigan, and he's the only child of Clara Bryant Ford and Henry Ford. He was 6 weeks old when his father tested his first engine in their kitchen, and he was 2.5 when he had his own little seat and his father's first vehicle that he had made with his own 2 hands, and that's known as the Quadricycle. And they have the one that he originally made at the Henry Ford. I don't know if they have it on display right now. And then they have a replica at Greenfield Village as well. By the age of 12, Edsel had learned to drive on his own. Before we go any further, I just thought it'd be fun to throw in a little letter from Edsel to Santa. So he would have been 8 years old. It says December 24th, 1901. Dear Santa Claus, I haven't had any Christmas tree in 4 years, and I have broken all my trimming, and I want some more, and I want a pair of roller skates and a book, and I can't think of anything more. I want you to think of something more. Goodbye, Edsel Ford. Let me move myself out of the way here, I hope. There we go. Edsel went to the Hotchkiss School in Lakeside, Connecticut, and then came back to attend Detroit University School. He graduated in 1912. At the Detroit University School, he had courses in drafting and engineering. And when he wrote, he liked to write about automobiles and manufacturing them, which would be natural given the environment he was brought up in. And he introduced his father, this is something I learned, to his university school manual arts teacher. So like what we would maybe called shop or something like that back then, and Clarence Avery. And Avery was soon employed by Ford and is given a lot of credit for developing the moving assembly line. So I'm guessing he took Henry Ford's vision and made it a reality, but I didn't know about him until I started researching Edsel. His practical education came from working in his father's automotive company. After school, he would go visit the Ford factory, and he helped in the office, and he also hung around to learn how cars were made. When he was 12, Ford had his own Model N Runabout, which was their biggest car, I believe, before the Model T. When he was, and his interest in car design, not just that was more of his focus, motivated him to develop several designs of his own when he was just a young man. And I think this picture of Edsel is him about the age of 20. Well, this picture might look familiar to some of you because it was taken in Florida, Southwest Florida. And I did a digital discussion called On the Road Again. And if you go to our YouTube channel, you can bring it up. But it talks about the camping trips of Edison, Ford, Firestone, and Burroughs. But a precursor, or some people believe an actual part of that, was in 1914 when they went to Big Cypress, which is right next to the Everglades, and faced brutal conditions to get there, and camped for 2 days because the weather was terrible. There were snakes, there was rain. But what I'm focusing on here, and you can't even see Edsel in this picture. Why? Because Edsel was the person that photographed it. Developed a great interest in photography. He's a very artistic person, as you'll find out later on, but he also, and you'll used his camera, and you'll see pictures of him frequently with the camera in his hand. And there's a little book that was created by Edsel about this very trip. And so there's more pictures of everyone else and not Edsel, because he was the photographer for it. And come into our museum and visit our Into the Wild exhibit. And by the way, I spoke about Lewis Latimer fairly recently. Come by and check out that exhibit too, we have in the museum. So there they are. And here is Edsel. And this is post-camping trip, but this is the only picture I think I know of him in Fort Myers area. And that's with Charles Edison and Madeline and her friend Betsy. And he stayed after their camping trip in 1914, after his parents and John Burroughs were done visiting, because they visited for a while, but he stayed longer. And Madeline writes about that, saying it was probably good for him. I think he was just before he turned 21. I think he was 20. It was good for him to be around other young people. Those aren't her exact words, but you get the idea. In 1915, when he's 21 years old, Edsel took a road trip, just because his birthday isn't until November. And he took a road trip from Detroit to San Francisco. And he made many stops along the way. Went with 6 friends. He traveled in a Model T and a Cadillac. And they took 5 weeks to cover 2,400 miles. And think about the automobiles then as compared to today, and how that ride was in cars that perhaps weren't designed as much for comfort. Some of the places they visited were the Rocky Mountains, the New Mexico desert, and the Grand Canyon. And Edsel visited the Grand Canyon at least 4 times that are documented, and we don't know how many other times. And to back up to Fort Myers for a minute, we know he was here in 1914, which would have been staying most likely in the Edison guest home. But he is listed as visiting here in 1929, but I've never, in Michelle Albion's book about the Florida life of Thomas Edison, and it is believed that he did visit here, but I don't see any pictures and I don't have any further information, but I'd love, if anybody out there has any, let me know. I did ask at the Edsel and Eleanor house, and they didn't have the information either. I'll talk about them later on, because they also have been very helpful to me. One last thing I want to talk about on their trips. He did travel with his parents a fair amount as their fortunes improved, because Henry had started out with several car companies. And then he finally, the Ford Motor Company is the one that gave him his greatest success. He founded that in 1903. And it goes on. 1908, they come out with Model T, and 1913, that moving assembly line, and Henry Ford became a very wealthy man. And so Edsel's life also changed. They were more middle class, maybe struggled a little bit, and they became quite wealthy. So he wasn't brought up at the beginning in a very wealthy family. Just keep that in mind. But fortunes did change as we go along here. And I love this picture of Edsel. Another one of him. It's about maybe 28 or so here. In 1915, at the age of 21, Edsel became secretary of the Ford Motor Company. He was also named to the company's board of directors, and in 1917, he became vice president of the company. And on January 1st, Edsel Ford, 1919, he took his father's place as president of the Ford Motor Company. Henry and let me mention something. Henry actually talks about starting another company and leaving. And some of that is believed to be because they were trying to get all their stock back, because it had, wasn't completely under their control. And then it all came back to Edsel and Henry and Clara. And so then it was completely run by the Ford family. But it said Edsel became president, but Henry remained in charge of many decisions there. I used to say when I would fill in on tours that there's not going to be anybody else in charge as long as Henry Ford's alive. And he was frequently forced to give in to Henry's wishes. Sometimes, though, he would he would fight for something that he wanted, but I would believe that he knew, hopefully knew the best way to deal with his father, particularly his father, in a company that was founded by him. But as you go on, you'll see it becomes more and more difficult. He was very adept at planning, sales, business, and advertising. So he's into the business side of this corporate affairs, and he oversees the company's expansion between 1919 and 1925. And he also gets into people being able to make payments on cars as well. But what Edsel, one of the things I'm going to say is his legacy here is he believes that an automobile can be beautiful, not just functional. We'll talk about that a little more. After the company purchased Lincoln Motor Company in 1921, he took charge of the Lincoln design and marketed Lincolns with customized bodywork by leading American and European designers. And he was instrumental in the design of the Model A in 1929, which was quite a change from the Model T, the Lincoln Zephyr in 1936, the Mercury line in 1938, and the Lincoln Continental in 1940. And that is said that the original owner of the company, there's a couple of things. He was something to do with Lincoln's, he was born around the time of Lincoln, that Lincoln was his favorite president. There's all kinds of different reasons there, but they ended up buying this company from the Leland company, the Leland family, father and son, and eventually they completely take it over and the Lelands are gone. So these pictures are interesting to me. This is Eleanor on her wedding day. That's will be Edsel's wife. There she is with her bridal party. And this is said to be Edsel's friends, groomsmen, but they don't call them groomsmen, but the gentlemen that are going to be in his wedding. And I don't know enough to know what function, who these people are and how they related. So I just put that in there because I found it an interesting picture and I wanted one of Edsel on his wedding day. There's a little video out there that you can find on YouTube about their wedding day. So there he is. And there is Eleanor. And she marries, Edsel marries her, Eleanor Clay, on November 1st, 1916. Edsel and Eleanor met at Annie Ward Foster's dancing school when she was 15 and he was 18. They lived just a blocks apart at a time. They married when she was 20 and Edsel was almost 23. His birthday would be just a few days later. Eleanor Clay was the niece of one of Detroit's leading department store owners, Joseph L. Hudson, and they married in front of the library of the family home on East Boston Boulevard, Detroit. And I just put this part in because I love the description. I don't know anything about fashion, but it was a Russian style dress that was from the House of Lucille. So it was designed, it was run by a British couturier, Lucy Duff Gordon. So it was supposed to have a Russian look there. What I wanted to say about Eleanor was her father died when she was fairly young, I believe about 12 years old. And she and her mother moved in with her uncle, her mother's brother, but that doesn't last very long before he passes away, but they stay in that home. Excuse me. And they were used to a fairly affluent lifestyle, in fact, a very wealthy lifestyle. But from all I can read, Eleanor was a very generous and lovely person who dressed very fashionably and does a lot of charitable things. Edsel and Eleanor had 4 children, Henry II, 1917, Benson in 1919, Josephine Clay in 1923, and William Clay, he's the youngest, in 1925. And think about where you know that name from. They first lived in the Indian Village neighborhood of Detroit, and I did find some pictures of that. It was a lovely little smaller home. And in 1920, and I believe it took 2 years to build, but don't quote me on that. It was designed by Albert Kahn at Gawker Point in Grosse Pointe Shores. And I'm very grateful to the Edison and Eleanor Papers and the Edsel and Eleanor Ford home. And their director, Mark, set me up with Belinda, who does their digital work there, and I'm very grateful they found a handful of pictures from their archives that would relate to us or would be of interest, and also some letters that I'm going to share with you. And this top one here of Eleanor, Josephine, and Edsel Ford on an outside patio was shared by them. So thank you to Belinda. And this is the family here, also in 1936. So that means that Edsel is about 43 and Eleanor would be about 40. And Henry would be, see, 1936 would be 19. And then Benson would be 17. And Josephine would be 13. And last but not least, William Clay Ford would be 11. And William Clay Ford, to give you a reminder, he is the person that owned the Detroit Lions football team later on, and then his wife owned it. And I believe today that their daughter runs that. And I'll talk more about their Edsel and Eleanor's home in Michigan, because it is absolutely breathtaking. And it was a thrill. I've been there once. I'd love to go back. But what is this place and why does it look so yellow? Well, this is hand tinted, I believe. So it really wasn't quite that color. It was more of a gray. Well, what is this? This is Edsel and Eleanor's home. In 1922, they purchased land in the village of Seal Harbor, Maine, in the town of Mount Desert near Arcadia National Park. So we're not that far from Bar Harbor, and began building the family summer home. And one of their neighbors, John D. Rockefeller, a philanthropist and a neighbor, wrote congratulating Edsel on his purchase, actually giving him an idea of where he thought he should build the home, but Edsel did it a little different. People talk, from what I can tell from reading back then, about the Rockefeller home, how it was made, what it was made out of. It actually got torn down, but Skylands, the summer home of Edsel Ford in Seal Harbor, Maine, I'll tell you in a minute who owns that today. But that letter began a friendship between the two men that led to them becoming partners in various charitable causes, and they became very close. And I would say that he was one of Edsel's closer friends, and he helps Edsel as he's doing his philanthropic work. He also inspires him. In fact, he was supposed to donate to the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and instead he ends up donating to one in Shenandoah at John Rockefeller's suggestion. The money, the $50,000, which would be worth a lot more today, did that instead. But he donates to so many things. Edsel, I'll talk about that more later. And the house offered the Ford family beautiful views of the Maine coast. So it's kind of a pinkish granite. I would think at some places I see it looks, and they wanted it to have some moss to look a little bit, blend in more with its environment. I'm not doing justice to the home or the description. And it offers beautiful views of the Maine coast, which would be in the summer. And from what I read, Eleanor had summered in the area as a young person, and that's why they went back there. And obviously they would be there in the summer. The Fords worked with the New York architect Duncan Candler. Ford and his wife Eleanor considered the placement and style of their homes, Skylands, and landscape architect Jens Jensen, you're going to hear about him on their home in Detroit, designed an enclosure of maples and pines along with kiwi vines. I never have heard of that, to be honest, but I'm sure horticulturists know about it. On the walls, the natural landscaping on the grounds. And this is Edsel with two of his children here at the beach in Maine. A little more formal wear than what we're used to today. Okay, here's your question. You're not going to get to answer it to me, but who lives at Skylands today? It's only had 3 owners. Whoever the Ford family sold it to, and with a lot of the furnishings inside as they were then, or they would become refreshing. You know who else bought it and owns it today? And I guess you can see around in that area sometimes. Martha Stewart owns this land. It's been an architect home, excuse me, and the land architectural magazines. You know, she's brightened it up, but kept much of what was there with the Ford home. Just had some things reupholstered and so on. And if anybody knows Martha, I'd love to see the home. Nothing against Martha, but it's not because she owns it. But I'd love to see Edsel's summer home. I'm a New Englander. I would love just to see this home because it sounds spectacular, and I didn't do it justice in the writing about this. Well, we're going to kind of change gears here and see what's happening right now. Who is this? This is Edsel and Henry Ford and the Model A. And look at that car. Edsel was president of Ford for almost 25 years, but often Henry made the decisions. Henry wanted to make cars that were practical, and Edsel believed that the public wanted more beautiful, sophisticated automobiles. The prototype new car that Edsel had built in 1921, I think I read somewhere it was a red car, but don't quote me on that. And if I make any mistakes about cars, I am not the car expert. Jim Moss, that is our automotive curator. He does an automotive tour, 10:30 on Monday mornings. That's the man you want to give your car questions to. And actually, but back to this, Henry actually apparently destroyed this prototype. Whenever Edsel had new ideas, if Henry didn't agree with them, it could be some pretty harsh consequences. I want to be a little back and forth on this section because Edsel does make some improvements to the Model T, which I had read increased sales, but I also read overall that sales were dropping. The Model T, it's been made since 1908, and it was still ongoing. And 1913 for the assembly line part of the Model T. But he added color, Edsel did. You all know that any color you want as long as it's black, but they had color in the beginning too. Some curved lines, smoother lines, and wire wheels. But by 1925, the sales fell off so drastically of the Model T that he began working with designers. So this is where there's a little information, but I think the Model T had maybe gotten a little long in the tooth, even with those improvements. So Edsel was going to work with designers at Murray Body Company. Well, why aren't they using their own designers? This is interesting to me. They didn't have them. Henry thought about function, not form, and they didn't have their own in-house designers for quite some time. But Edsel didn't like that because that meant it was easier for designs to be leaked. In December of 1926, Edsel returned after a European trip, went to his father's office and convinced him to give up the Model T because it was time, and make a new car. And Edsel took the lead in styling the Model A, often described as the baby Lincoln. Now, he is not the car designer, but he influences and works with the car designers to get the design that he wanted. And the Model A is often known as the baby Lincoln. It was lower and sleeker than the Model T, and it was more powerful and smoother. It could go a lot faster, maybe 55 to 65. And the A was also the first Ford car with that blue oval logo, I'm sure that you're all familiar with, and the first car assembled at the River Rouge, the huge manufacturing plant. Although chiefly interested in style, Edsel, I read, was responsible for the installation of hydraulic brakes on Ford cars and entrusting his father in building a 6-cylinder engine to sell with the V8, a 6-cylinder engine to sell with the V8. He also brought about the development of safety glass when a friend was in a car accident in 1926. And again, I'm doing my very best here, but remember, I'm not a car person. I'm a history person, interested in cars as relate to the Ford family, and I admire beautiful vehicles, but I am not an expert. And by the way, if you remember, history is always fluid and we're uncovering new information as I do this as well. There's so much more I'd love to uncover about Edsel. After the Stout Metal Airplane Company was taken over by Ford Motor Company in 1925, they had worked with them before. Edsel approved the design of a tri-motor airplane. And that's up in the left, and that's after it was parked, I believe, gosh, North Carolina, Virginia. It wasn't one that when Bird was using it. He gave, and Tri-Motors have visited here at Pagefield before, and you can pay to go on a ride. My husband's gone on 3 of them. I should go because I do. Now that I found out the Edsel's connection, I definitely will have to go on a ride in one sometimes. And hopefully they'll be back because they do visit different places in the country. But anyways, back to Edsel. He gave financial support to Admiral Richard Byrd's groundbreaking flights over the North Pole in 1926 and the South Pole in 1929. There's an Antarctic mountain range named in Edsel's honor, and he also a rock mountain peak. He also encouraged Ford Motor Company's participation in events like the World's Fair during the 1930s. And so I told you about the Tri-Motor. Down here on the left, that's a Fokker. And no, Ford didn't manufacture that, but guess what? Richard Byrd, Admiral Byrd, was no dummy. He put Josephine Ford's name on it. Josephine Ford, Byrd, Arctic Expedition. And so Edsel helped finance it. I told you he's a philanthropist, and there's Richard Byrd. And yes, you could tell me it's controversial. Some people don't believe he actually ended up at the North Pole. I'm not an expert on that, but we do know there is an Antarctic mountain range named in Edsel's honor, as well as a rock mountain peak. He does go to the South Pole. And Edsel comes up with other things like Ford Motor Company participates in the World's Fairs that are taking place during the 1930s. And again, this is a very condensed version of Edsel's life. There's so much more that I'm leaving out and things that are happening behind the scenes in the Ford Motor Company. And this is Edsel and Eleanor in 1934. Why did I put this in here besides the fact that she looks very stylish? Actually, they're both very stylish. I think he was on best dressed list, and I believe she will be throughout her life. And they are at a ball game, and I'm going to guess that this was a Detroit Tigers ball game. And in my research, I came across that Edsel was somewhat responsible for getting the Detroit Red Wings, the hockey team, to Detroit. And he also tried to bring a National League baseball team there that didn't work out. But Edsel apparently liked baseball, and baseball and the history of baseball, my passion. So I loved hearing that. Wow. I'm cutting this off here. I go. He's a well-known philanthropist who established the Ford Foundation in 1936. And I hope I'm going to talk about that a little more later on. But this changed things for the Ford family and enabled them to keep more of their fortune. But it also changed things for so many organizations because they donate so much money. Edsel loves painting. He loves collecting art. And he did there's some drawings. If you go to the Henry Ford, you can see some of his artwork. And I also told you he became very interested in photography. This is something that's great interest to me. And none of these pictures are going to do it justice. You all need to go to Detroit and visit the Detroit industry murals. And they say he commissioned them. There's so much different wording on this. We know he paid between $20,000 and $22,000, which today would be like well over $360,000, probably more, for those murals. So he paid for most of it. By Diego Rivera for the Detroit Institute of Art. His own collection of art included Van Gogh, Degas, Renoir, Matisse, as well as some arts and artifacts from Africa and Asia. Some of his collection is in the Detroit Institute of Art today. I think their whole African art section was started by Edsel's donations. Edsel and Eleanor are major contributors to the Detroit Institute of Art, and they donate their art, African art, and they donated some art by Van Gogh, Renoir, Degas, and during the Great Depression. And by the way, when I'm researching things, there's not a lot of books that are just on Edsel. I'll talk about what's out there and from other sites that I consider reputable. Sometimes there's just a little different information. So I do my best to pick out what I think is the most accurate. During the Great Depression, Edsel and Eleanor paid the salaries of employees at the museum. Edsel was a trustee at the Museum of Modern Art in New York from 1935 till 1943 when he died. And Eleanor became a trustee there in 1948. And the Ford Foundation actually donates $1 million to the museum in Edsel's memory in 1963. He also attended many concerts at the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, and he was a generous donor to the Detroit Symphony Society. And what is this? And I'll just show you right here that this is Edsel Ford with Wilhelm Valentiner, who was the curator, the director, I guess I should say, of the Detroit Institute of Art for about 25 years. 27 panels, murals in the Detroit Institute of Art. And I'll just go on to this picture here. And I have some pictures I took on my very bad iPhone 6 camera at the time. They won't do it justice. It is amazing. And looking at it, but they weren't without controversy. Diego Rivera had become a communist. And he was painting. There was a big movement originally in Mexico to paint murals, which he had done some there. Edsel brings him to Detroit 1932 to 1933. I think it takes about 9 months. And he's painting, and it's fresco paintings. Boy, can you tell I don't know much about art, but they do it on a white plaster, I believe. They paint, it's wet, and you paint on it. And you don't need to bother correct me if I made a mistake. I understand I'm not saying it right. By the way, my son is an art conservator, an art historian, and an art auctioneer, auction house. So he knows a lot more. And I'm sorry, I'm stumbling through this part, but I can tell you this, they are awe-inspiring. They were controversial. They talk about the industries in Detroit, among them, River Rouge, the Ford factory, and Rivera is just like mesmerized by what happens there. The drug industry, not that kind of drugs, but pharmaceutical companies, several other things. But there's a more modern version in that time of what a nativity scene would look like. It is so controversial that people don't want it put up. And in the 50s, the Detroit Institute of Art puts up something that says, though we abhor his views, we're going to keep the art. There's a little sign there. There was a little sign about it, but people wanted them to be whitewashed over because of Diego Rivera's beliefs. And Diego Rivera is married to Freda Kahlo, and she is there when he's working on these. And yes, I know their marriage was tumultuous, and I know they're both very controversial for some of their behaviors. But this is probably his big moment. And then he does something in New York that causes paints something in New York, causes a lot of controversy. And his star kind of fades while hers rises. Her paintings are much smaller, but today, especially as a female artist, she is very well-known and sought after. But she was there, and she does keep up a correspondence with Edsel later on, but she didn't actually paint there, though I saw a picture of her working on her art while he was doing this. So, and he did have people help him, and that wasn't without controversy because they complained that they weren't getting paid enough. But no matter what, just think that Edsel Ford had a major part in this. And now I'm going to show you something really goofy, and that's me. And why is this important? The painting is done by Diego Rivera. It's on masonite, I believe, with oil. And I got to visit the Detroit Institute of Art with a group on a director's tour from Edison Ford Winter Estates. I was very thankful to our president and CEO that I had the opportunity to go there. We ate in the Detroit Institute of Art. We had a banquet set up, and we got to look at the artwork. I didn't have nearly enough time. I might not know much, but I sure appreciate it. But Edsel Ford is one of my favorites. And I asked the security guard to take this picture. So you can see that I'm a I'm a nerdy kind of person, but I loved this. And standing next to that painting of Edsel, it was amazing for me. Go to the Detroit Institute of Art, go to all the places in Detroit that are historic that you could get to. Another photo from the Edsel and Eleanor Ford papers, Edsel and Eleanor Ford House Archives. This is Edsel and Benson Ford on the deck of the Arcadia during the 1935 Yale-Harvard races in New London, Connecticut. And yes, Edsel loved boating. And this is called the Acadia, like Acadia up in Maine. So I think Benson would have been about 16 there. Edsel Ford comes back from a European vacation in 1938, and he's going to collaborate with designer Bob Gregoire on a custom car with a sophisticated continental look. Edsel took the car to his hometown, Florida home, where reactions were so positive it was put into production. And that's the Lincoln Zephyr right there. That was Edsel's personal car, personally made for him. And the Zephyr was a train, a locomotive. And that's what it was named after. Like, I guess it was like the Lincoln Zephyr and perhaps the word continental after that. But people saw it and they wanted one. It was a beautiful car. Ford Motor Company, I'll just recap, had purchased a struggling Lincoln Motor Company in 1922 for $8 million from Henry Leland. I had this in here twice, I guess, or I talked about it twice. Edsel at Lincoln had the freedom to create without Henry's interference, the interference that he had at Ford Motor Company. Edsel was a champion of more modern car design. I think Edsel, well, we put those two words together, and Bob Gregoire. Eugene, I think was his real first name, enjoyed a productive, creative relationship and hired by Edsel in 1932. Remember, they didn't, because they're going to have their own design place. He became the first head of Edsel, of Ford's design department in 1935. They produced the 1936 Lincoln Zephyr and the 1939 Lincoln Continental. And this was groundbreaking, I think, in the industry. Yeah, yes, there was Cadillacs out there too. I realized that. The two men developed a special relationship that continued until Edsel's death in 1943. In addition to production automobiles, Gregoire designed cars for Edsel's personal use, and I couldn't put them all in here. And as I told you, I really am ignorant about cars, but I do know a beautiful vehicle. He also founds the Mercury division. Unfortunately, that's not around today, but that was kind of the mid-price band between Ford and Lincoln. And that's Edsel Ford's personal Lincoln Continental. And the Henry Ford Museum has the amazing car collection. They are open year round, and I'm sure that they, museums rotate, they're just exhibits, but I bet you could find something in there that will relate to Edsel Ford. I did get to visit that 2017. I need to go back to there as well. And the one thing I didn't touch upon was that Henry Ford, yes, he made it very difficult at times to work for Edsel. He and Edsel were very close growing up, but Ford founded this company. I think he wanted control of it. Maybe he was a bit of a controlling person. And he brings in somebody named Harry Bennett, who's I don't know what his real qualifications were, but he met him, becomes head of Ford Security. And that's when Ford gets a bad reputation. I mean, he's responsible for when there were strikes at Ford Motor Company, bringing some violence to be caused. As Henry gets older, he has so much control. He makes life miserable for Edsel. There's fights and disputes. I think he's physically making Edsel sick because he, in my opinion, is able to manipulate Henry Ford as he gets older in his behavior and controls. And Edsel just can't stand it. It gets worse and worse. The older Henry gets, as his health is failing. I don't go into Harry Bennett a lot, but let me say that he wasn't a nice person, and he is eventually let go from Ford Motor Company. by Henry Ford's grandson, Henry Ford II. And it's quite a moment. And this is a sign in front of the Edsel and Eleanor Ford home. As I think I told you, I had the privilege of visiting there. They've done a lot more. I was there in 2017. They have a large visitor center. They have some exhibits. I know they've done some work, and it is run as a nonprofit. It was impressive when I visited there, and I'd love to go back. And they have a restaurant there in Grosse Pointe Shores. You should go visit it. Henry Ford and Clara Ford's home is still, it's being worked on. It's going to be amazing when it's done. And I remember one thing that I heard was when we visited there, it's not open to the public yet. I believe the grounds are in their season, but that it was just when Henry and Clara built it, it was with the idea that Edsel would be there. And I think a year later, he marries shortly thereafter, and the design of the home changed. And one thing I think Henry and Clara, it was really hard for them. Edsel's life becomes very different than theirs. He's much more sophisticated. Music, art, friends they don't approve of. Not bad people, just a different lifestyle, arts, music. And at one thing I read was that they were hoping at one point that Edsel and Eleanor would move in with them, but I didn't find that anywhere else, so I'm not sure. So Henry definitely didn't approve of a lot of things that Edsel did. Clara kind of was torn back and forth, I think, between her husband and her son. So they wanted a quiet lifestyle, the Fords. But so that kind of goes back and forth. Edsel Ford, let me read you the sign. President of Ford Motor Company for many years, and his wife, Eleanor Clay, completed this 87-acre estate in 1927. Architect Albert Kahn derived the design from precedents in Cotswold, England. And many of the building materials, including the staircase paneling and fireplaces, were brought from old English homes. Noted landscape architect Jens Jensen developed the grounds. The Fords were collectors of art and antiques and benefactors of local and national institutions. And Edsel was instrumental in the creation of the Ford Foundation in 1936. It preserved their fortune, remember that, but it made his philanthropic interest reach so many people. He focused on Detroit, but it goes to hospitals, art, music, just throughout the country, so many places that we might not be aware of where Edsel or Ford Foundation donated. He died here on May 26, 1943. His wife, who lived here until her death on October 19, 1976, endowed the property and directed it be maintained for public use. And that's what happened today. And as I said, they have done so much work there. And I'll tell you again, and I want to say thanks to our volunteer, Dan. I visited there. I took a picture. His was better. It's up top here. And that's Edsel and Eleanor's home. It's designed by well-known Detroit architect Albert Kahn, and he has also made some of Ford's factories. It's inspired, I already read this to you, but by some Cotswold-style cottages in England. The family moved into their home. It said I have conflicting information. It's probably correct on the sign, 2728. It was a beautiful home filled with art and antiques. And when I went on a tour, and I could have stayed there forever. And at the time they were doing guided tours of room to room. I think that's a little different now. I'll talk about more of that. But it was just amazing. There's a room called the Modern Room. There's rooms filled with original art that they had collected. Some of it has been placed by high end. I know they had to sell one, they sold one piece, but there's still some there, some given to other places, donated, but just an amazing place with an amazing feel to it. That's kind of redundant, but you got to go visit it. The family headed by Edsel and Eleanor were generous supporters of many charities. In addition to those mentioned, they also donated to the Detroit Artist Market and Henry Ford Hospital. And Eleanor, I read, made a point of supporting schools and social services that focused on women and children. They gave millions, often anonymously or quietly, and they shared those values with their children to donate money and realize that they now have the Ford Foundation. that they can turn their money into. A lot of non-voting shares, and then there are voting shares that are held some by family members, but it preserved their fortune. Otherwise, they could have lost between 70 to 77% when Henry dies. And that's all thanks to Edsel that he worked on this foundation. And again, there's some information, and I tried to winnow it, focus it, and make sure I could get accurate. But every presentation, every talk, history's fluid. Remember, sometimes things change. So you continue to update. But isn't this home just amazing? They don't allow pictures inside, but they did sell a booklet when I was there that you can, I have mine, so you can see what the inside of the home looks like. The grounds are on Lake St. Clair. They include a powerhouse, a gatehouse. They're not all open right now, if I recall. 2 apartments and an 8-car garage, the 2 apartments for the gatehouse, a pool house, and Josephine's playhouse. And Jens Jensen designed the grounds at Gawker Point between 1926 and 1932. In 2016, it became a National Historic Landmark. And that's Josephine's little playhouse that was open at the time. I think that varies. Some of the grounds are just beautiful. My favorite part are roses. I know not everyone enjoys that. There wasn't much blooming when I was there, but the beauty by the lake, some just like kind of made me think like you're walking through a meadow, part of it. I know they hold weddings there. Just a beautiful place. Oh, and I kind of lost my train of thought on Henry Ford's home. That isn't open to the public, but you can visit the grounds in the spring, summer. They're working on it to make it like it was when Henry and Clara were there. They changed things over the years, but eventually that will be open, and you need to check that out too. There's lots to see in Detroit, and lots to visit at this home. This is, again, thanks to the Edsel and Eleanor Ford papers, the Edsel and Eleanor Ford House Archives. This is a letter written by Edsel, and I'm going to do my best to read it. And you can see it looks like some flags, sailing flags. Onika, dear Henry and Betsy, we are on Onika at St. Augustine, moored about 500 feet from the Municipal Yacht Watch. We arrived from Jacksonville, so he visited Florida quite a bit. They did have a home in Hope Sound after 7 hours of cruising. The trip down on the train was pleasant and passed very quickly. Mr. and Mrs. Newberry were on the train from Detroit to Jacksonville. Mrs. N went then to Miami, and Mr. N got off with us and had breakfast with others on the boat. He had some business to transact today. So this is a letter to his son. I was leaving on the 4 o'clock plane for Miami, expecting to be there about 30 minutes after Mrs. N arrived. St. Augustine doesn't look too swell. A little change from today because I believe it's a beautiful area from the water, but we are going to look it over tomorrow. And I don't know what he actually thought of it when he got there, and motored down to Daytona Beach on Wednesday to see Sir Malcolm Campbell run for a record. So I'm guessing that's some kind of boating race. We may have the boat come down while we are there and get on board at Daytona instead of returning by motor to St. Augustine. The way it looks now, you boys will get off the train at Jacksonville and join us by motor on Ormond 90 miles by road. Mr. Backus will meet you at the Grand Central, New York at 4:58 p.m. on Friday, March 22nd. You can leave Millerton. I think they were away at school at 2 or 2 p.m. The train to Florida leaves New York at 6:45 p.m. Friday, and you'll arrive in Jacksonville at 7:10 p.m. Saturday. You probably will get by boat Saturday at 10 p.m. Be sure to get tickets for, and I don't know what that says, for Bob Stickenfield and your friend, if you bring one, as well as your own, from Millerton to New York. Mother will write in a couple of days. I have your clothes from home and shoes here with us now. Lots of love. See you soon, Pop. Enclosed is the itinerary, which she actually shared with me. I didn't put that in here. The person, Belinda from Edsel and Eleanor Ford House. And enclosed is the itinerary of what I've written down about train times. And I realize this doesn't sound very exciting, but I think it shows what a loving and devoted father that paid attention to all these details about his sons. And just one last letter. This is from the following year, April 8th, 1936. Again, the Edsel and Eleanor Ford papers, the Edsel and Eleanor Ford House Archives. Dear Henry, I want you to know how much fun and enjoyment Mother and I had with you boys in Florida and New York. It was a very generous thing for you to be willing to go to Ormond and miss a lot of activity at home or elsewhere, but I feel that we all enjoyed the quiet and had pretty good times. I hope you were not badly upset by my ranting at the station after you missed the train. It was stupid of me to think that you had tried to miss it, but we were both upset by waiting so long in the station and wondering what had happened. And I lost my temper. I'm very sorry. You hear about that happening very often with Edsel. I hope you arrived in time to avoid the scowls of the masters that's supposed to be at school and are going along now with the old routine. Good luck and love as ever, Pop. And why did I include this? Let me explain. Because I thought it told about his relationship, that they enjoyed family time, and that if he did lose his temper, and I don't know, he was willing to apologize, something I don't think happened with his father. That's just my educated guess. And I really appreciated that they let me use this information. I also did a digital discussion about how Edsel Ford and Ford Motor Company helped save World War II. To me, this is one of Edsel's shining moments, certainly part of his legacy. Willow Run was the vision of Edsel Ford and the design of production director Charles Sorensen. I don't think they had necessarily been close before, but they will become very close and spend so much time. And Sorensen writes about it in his autobiography. It was the first factory to mass produce bombers. The long assembly line was nearly a mile long and delivered almost 9,000 of B-24 Liberators, half of all of them produced during the war. I believe out in California, the company out there Consolidated, I think it is, I can't remember for sure, but they were doing somewhere between 9 and 12 a month. Edsel believed they could get to that one per hour. He got to see it be a success. It started out very slowly, took almost a year. There was no housing. It was a rough start. They're investigated by the Truman Commission. I think that's what it was called, but by some senators because it took so long. But he did get to see it start to be successful, but he did not live long enough to see one B-24 come out an hour. But Edsel promised this would happen. Willow Run and all of Ford's military contributions put him in conflict with his father. And his father was a pacifist in the early years of the war. He wrote a peace ship in World War I. Let's talk about that for a second. Edsel Ford did not fight in World War I. Teddy Roosevelt, who had 4 sons, and I think he lost one, he really ripped into it because Henry, a pacifist, had got a deferment for Edsel, which caused him no end of embarrassment, humiliation. And I think what he does during World War II more than makes up for it. Trust me, I don't believe in war, but once the United States enters the war, but even before that, Edsel was willing to help President Roosevelt. They were supposed to make something for the war effort, and then Henry doesn't allow it. But by the time we enter the war, we won't get into the reasons why we did. But once we are, Henry knows, based on Edsel convincing him that they must. And Ford Motor Company just doesn't produce B-24s. They produce all kind of equipment at the Rouge as well. They do a lot towards the war effort. I'm not a fan of war. I think it's a horrible thing, but once we were in it, we needed to win. And these bombers were the workhorse of the war. And even talking about this it makes me feel emotional because war is never the answer. That's just my own pontificating there. And let's get back to Ford Motor Company. The entire Ford Motor Company organization supported the wartime efforts. The true champion, who does not get the credit, often doesn't get the credit he deserves, was Edsel Ford, says Ted Ryan, historian of Ford Motor Company. I'm quoting them. Edsel Ford worked tirelessly to get the appropriate resources and maximize company's astounding manufacturing output. His work developing and supporting Willow Run is a lasting achievement, and Edsel died in 1943 of stomach cancer and extreme stress. I added that part on there. He and his father were at great conflict during this time. Henry was always seeking to undo things Edsel did, but he was in the early stages. He was maybe even more advanced stages of dementia. Harry Bennett, I can't say enough bad things about him. He's influencing Ford behind the scenes, almost undermining everything Edsel tries to do running the company. Henry still isn't letting go. He's confused. And I just think his mindset had changed when Edsel became a young adult, could control him. I don't know what happened, but he became very hard on Edsel. And then as he's influenced by Harry Bennett, it becomes worse. Charles Sorensen and Edsel become very close. He talks about Edsel's last few months. It was a brutal, difficult time. Edsel did, maybe it even started in 1940, but by 1941 or so, his health's starting to fail, and it gets worse and worse. And doctors are diagnosing him with different things, but he was never opened up until he was, I think it was November of 1942, but around that time period, they open him up, and he's full of cancer. There's people that believe if something had been done sooner, maybe different doctors, I'm not one, certainly, maybe his life could have been saved. And he also has undulant fever. Henry Ford didn't always pasteurize the milk from his dairy farm. I don't know why Edsel drank the milk, but they believe that contributed. And he just had extreme stress for a long time. I think he just thought it was ulcers. So he's just sewn back up, and he is left. He goes on and continues to work. Doesn't the last few weeks of his life, when he's in excruciating pain, he's in and out. Sorensen writes about this, of hospitals. This man is dying, and he is still fighting to keep Ford Motor Company going in this war effort at Willow Run that he took so very seriously. There is a fun story that my husband pointed out to me in the book, The People's Tycoon, and I think I forgot to add that to my sources list, that talks about Henry Ford, but talks about Franklin Roosevelt visiting, and Henry does not like Roosevelt, and they visit the plant, and Henry is stuck between Franklin and Eleanor, and they are people of substance, a little bigger than him, and he's glowering at Edsel, and I believe Sorensen are sitting in the jump seats. He was not a happy man, and there's this picture where you can see a little bit of Roosevelt and Ford. I should have put it in here, but not Eleanor, but he wasn't happy. But I just want you to know, Edsel kept working until he could work no longer. He'll stay at home for a little while, lapse into a coma, I believe is what I read, and then he will pass away. He's only 49 years old. That is him in 1943 with Henry. So you realize we're looking at a man that's dying, that's still giving his all for his family, for Ford Motor Company, for the war effort. There was a lot of patriotism in the United States in 1943 during World War II. It's a very different time from today, just thinking about what's going on in the world. And this is at Woodlawn Cemetery in Detroit. He dies May 26, 1943. Eleanor dies in 1976, but she carries on her husband's legacy. There's pictures of her with her grandchildren. She keeps the home, donates it, an absolutely breathtaking, beautiful home that I'm so thankful that has been kept the way it is. Got a couple quotes here. Father made the most popular car in the world. I want to make the best car in the world. And that's said by Edsel Ford. This is not said by Edsel Ford. This is said by Henry. Edsel is the artist in our family. Art is something I know nothing about. Edsel again. There are no crown princes at Ford, which means he just didn't inherit it. He had to earn it, work at it. Yes, he had an advantage. He's the son of the owner, but he worked hard. In fact, he gave, in my opinion, his life to Ford Motor Company. I think something could have been done much sooner. Ford Motor Company and Willow Run. And wealth must be put to work helping people to help themselves. So I want to say a couple of more things about what I think Edsel's legacy is, and I'm going to show you my sources. He was a philanthropist. I told you a number of the things. This is his legacy. And he founded the Ford Foundation that put so much of the non-voting stock, which is, I believe, 90%. But again, I'm not an expert in this, but just in sweeping generalizations, it saved their fortune. It made millions, probably even more than that, available to people and organizations in need. He influenced the design of cars. He and Bob Gregoire for something that was beautiful. Art. So much art that he collected, he donated, that's in his home that we can see today, or the Detroit Institute of Art. World War II, his effort heading up Ford Motor Company and the things that they did for the war effort, and particularly Willow Run, aviation, supporting Admiral Byrd, and buying Stout and other things that he did and supported. And again, the Ford Foundation. He has a huge legacy. You know, some of the things I couldn't go into a depth about, and there's so much more I'd like to know. Let me tell you something about Edsel Ford. There's not a lot informally, other than books about Henry that's written about him. I don't know if this will show up. This isn't even in print today. Oh, look at this. I'm such a Henry and Edsel. This isn't in print. We used to sell this in the store, and I have a copy of it. It's very interesting book, some tidbits, and you can find used copies perhaps on eBay. Something else I'd like to talk about. This book, I'm very thankful. Historian Fred knew I was going to buy it, and he bought me a copy. It's called Edsel. It's out of print. It is by Henry Dominguez. I think it was published in 2002, but it also has some information, but a lot of information about Edsel, and you could get that on eBay as well. And I didn't list Arsenal Democracy either, but if you are interested in Willow Run and Ford and the other companies World War II, read that book and go on to YouTube and see my digital discussion about that, because it's a really fascinating time that deserves a lot more attention. Here's some of my sources. The Biography Your Dictionary, Detroit Library in Michigan. They have some of his papers. There's just so many. Another library site, the Edsel and Eleanor Ford home, written about in Architectural Digest. Edsel and Eleanor papers, I can't say enough about them. And I did get some information from their website in addition to what they gave me. Edsel and Eleanor's just Edsel Ford brought design and elegance to Ford Motor Company vehicles. If you want any of these things sent to you, I'd be happy to share them with you. Edsel Ford's 1941 Lincoln Continental, the Henry Ford blog, the book I mentioned, the Detroit Historical Society. Oh, I did mention the Arsenal of Democracy, the Ford House, again, amazing people, the creation of the Ford Empire, and Edsel Ford, Detroit Free Press, Lincoln Continental original design, origins on Ford.com. There's so much out there that I would love you to check out. But my goal is to help you to know, unabashedly, I'm going to say this, is to know that, Edsel Ford wasn't perfect. And there's always controversy about somebody that's wealthy and well-known. but a lot of people don't even know who he is. So my goal is to bring him to your attention and for you to seek out more information. As I said, if you want to go to his sites, I want to tell you when my next digital discussion is, by the way. Learn more about Edsel Ford, please. There's so much out there. You don't want to miss it. And as I said, I'd be happy to do that. Let's share anything you want to know. Next month, April 12th, 10:30, go to our calendar, and it is about Harvey Firestone, who doesn't have a home that you could go visit. And it's called It Started with a Handshake, because that's how it starts between Ford and Firestone. And I would love to see you join me on that. Let's see what our chats say. Okay. Great job, Holly. Best one yet, but I'm partial to the Tri-Motor and B24. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Melissa's wanted to know, are we able to get a copy of today's recording of today's session? You did a great job making it full of interesting details. Thank you. To Alexandria Ford is just named to the Ford board, bears a striking resemblance to her great-grandmother, Eleanor. Yeah, I have read that. There's two of them that have been appointed to the board. And by the way, now there are 5 generations of Ford family that continue his work. We had Edsel Ford II here a few years ago. They were doing a commercial. I guess maybe he's been here twice. I got to meet him very briefly, but what a gentle, he was just, I looked at him and said, I'm such an admirer of your grandfather. And I think people thought I was confused and was talking about Henry Ford. Not that I don't think there's things to admire about him, but I wasn't. That would have been his great-grandfather. It was Edsel. So yes, by the way, yes, I'm sorry. This is going to get put on YouTube tomorrow. Kelly helps me put it on there. And if I do anything goofy in the beginning, she edits it, but it will be on YouTube. You go to Edison Ford Digital Discussions and you'll be able to find it. And excellent in-depth information that makes me want to visit Edison Ford Estates again. And yes, please come here and visit, because if you go into the Wild exhibit, you'll find out, see some of Edsel's handiwork in those pictures, and you can see it's covered up, it's undercover, but you can see the photography book he created. And oh, thanks, Holly. It was a great presentation from Mary Lou. Thank you. I appreciate you all. Thank you. Probably, I love to research, and hours and hours, and to winnow it down and to get it in slides. I don't ever feel I do justice to my topic, but I thank you for joining with me each month. I'll see you next month. So sometime tomorrow, that'll go on Edison Ford YouTube channel. Digital discussions, the ones I've done and the ones that Adam did before that will be there. And you can email me at hshaffer@edisonford.org. And if you ever need our address, it's 2350 McGregor Boulevard, Fort Myers, 33901. Thank you for joining me. And thank you for your support. See you next month. Thanks.